Hi, in this lesson we'll look at comparing objects. As we learned in previous lessons, there are some key differences between primitive and reference type values. As we've discussed with primitives, if we have the line int x equals 30, in memory there's actually the value 30 stored inside that variable x. For reference objects, we have a memory address stored in the variable. For the line of code rectangle rec equals new rectangle 10, 2, that has a rectangle object with a width of 10 and a height of 2, we don't actually have that rectangle object stored inside that variable. Instead, the memory address corresponds to a place in memory where the actual attributes of the rectangle are stored. We can really think of it as a pointer. The variable rect points to a location in memory that actually holds the rectangle. Objects are really just pointers. They are references to locations in memory. In general, the variable is storing a location or reference to where the actual object data is located. This is the case for all objects. The difference between reference and primitive memory storage is important when we attempt to compare objects to one another. As we learned in previous lessons, double equal signs are used to compare if two values or variables are equal. In this example, we can use the double equal sign because the primitive value x is being directly compared to the primitive value of y. With objects, however, because the variable is pointing to a location, the use of double equal sign is not possible, as the memory address is being compared between objects, not the actual values. In this example, 1 and 2 are not equal because they are referring to different rectangles saved in memory. In order for us to compare objects, we need to use the dot equals method. Dot equals varies depending on the class, but in essence, equals is used to compare the values stored in objects to determine if the values of both objects are the same. When we compare rectangle 1 to rectangle 2, the values of width and height are being compared to one another. This type of evaluation is referred to as logical equality. Classes often have their own equals method used to compare objects of the same data type. When using classes as a client, it's good to note if there is an equals method, and to know how that method is comparing objects of the same data type. While equals is used to determine if the value of two objects are the same, we can actually use double equal sign or not equals on objects to determine if they are aliases of one another. An alias refers to when two objects are referencing the same object. Let's take a look at an example. Here we have the initialization of two rectangles, 1 and 2. Rectangle 1 is being initialized with a new rectangle object, and 2 is being initialized with 1. Rectangle 2 is being assigned the same rectangle object as rectangle 1. This means that it is an alias of rectangle 1. In practice, what that means is that they are both pointing to the same object in memory. When we use the double equal sign, the evaluation will return true because the two objects are referencing the same memory address and thus are referencing the same object. Comparing values this way is referred to as reference equality. We can also use double equals with objects to determine if they actually reference an object at all. We learned in previous lessons about the keyword null, which indicates that an object has yet to be initialized. We can compare objects to the keyword null to determine if the object is actually a reference to anything. This is a useful check used in dot equals methods, and can be used as a preventative measure in other methods to prevent errors. Now that we've learned a bit more about comparing objects, let's get some practice evaluating a couple of statements. Using the 4 strings initialized on this slide, can you determine what the results will be for the print statements? The first 2 statements will print false, and the third statement will print true. The first prints false because string 1 and string 2 are referencing different string objects of dog. The second is false because the string values are different, and because they reference different string objects. The third prints true because string 1 and string 4 are aliases of one another. They reference the same string object and thus will result in true. Now let's test the same string objects using the dot equals method. Can you figure out the print statement output? The first and third print true, while the second prints false. Because equals is checking the value of the object's attributes, the first print statement will result in true. The second is false because dog and cat are different strings. And the third is true because the value of string 4 is equivalent to string 1. Now that you've learned about comparing objects, let's get some practice using them in the CodeHS editor.